Andrew Tate has been in a lot of trouble recently, and he's been getting purged off of YouTube, he's gotten purged off of Instagram. I mean, it looks like he's about to lose his Costco membership. He's getting kicked off of so many platforms. He's gone in on women, he's gone in on dating with a bunch of controversial takes that got him in a lot of trouble. But something that he said, which is extremely controversial, wrong, and even full of a few lies, hasn't gotten him any heat at all, even though it's one of the most important geopolitical issues of the 21st century. That's his opinions on the war in Ukraine, which are wrong, full of conspiracy, and just sometimes downright lies. Let's talk about it. So there's a million things I could talk about when it comes to Andrew Tate. He's gotten in a lot of trouble. He's gotten banned off of a lot of platforms. I could talk about the red pill ideology more broadly. I could talk about his opinions when it comes to other political issues. There's a million things I could talk about when it comes to Andrew Tate because I disagree with him on a million different issues. And I'm not the first person to disagree with him on these issues. But the thing is, I don't think I'm the best person to talk about dating and relationships. I'm a pretty young guy. I'm 21 years old. I don't know if I'm the best person to confront what he says about dating. I think other people with more experience in dating who talk about relationships and those dynamics a lot more than me might be better suited. But I do think I'm more suited to talk about another issue that he's talked about a decent amount on his show. It doesn't dominate his show, but he's talked about it. And he has influenced his audience opinions on this issue. And seeing that I am in Ukraine, I've been to the front line, I've interviewed a lot of Ukrainians, I've interviewed a lot of Ukrainian soldiers, I've done a lot of research around the issues surrounding the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I think I'm much better suited to talk about the takes he's had about Ukraine since the start of the war up until today, which have varied in their accuracy from sometimes on point, which we're going to start with the things that I do agree with him on, all the way to just being flat out lies when he talks about Alex Jones and his conspiracies on Ukraine. So let's start in February when the Russians first invaded Ukraine. A few days after the invasion, there was a few opinions given by Andrew Tate, and this is actually where we're going to find the most agreement with Andrew Tate, where he actually was the most accurate when it came to his descriptions of the war. So let's play a clip where he talks about a few issues, but it's going to start off by him talking about Russian public opinion, social media, and who exactly Russia is sending to the front line.
I'm going to go full conspiracy theory on all of you. Putin was WEF along with Trudeau and the rest. I don't believe any of it. Yes, there's a war, but in war, it's always the peasants and the peons and the civilians that die, right? So what Putin's done is he's mobilized a bunch of Mongols and Eskimos, Chechens, people without social media, miles away, a bunch of 20-year-olds, told them they're on a military exercise, put them on a military exercise, then told them they were attacked and sent them into Ukraine. They didn't even know what they're doing. Most Russians don't even know what's going on. That's the first thing that's happened.
What he said here about who the Russian government is sending to the front line, who they're sending to the war, is absolutely accurate. The truth is that the Russian government could not sustain support for this war if they were sending the middle-income Muscovite to the front lines. If they're going to be sending the people in the Moscow Oblast, or for people from Kaliningrad or any of these areas, St. Petersburg, no. That's not going to be able to keep up support for the war if they were taking people from there and just throwing them into the front lines. That's not to say nobody from that area is served, but disproportionately, it's been the minorities of Russia who have been serving in this conflict and have been dying at higher rates. It's, people from Tanutuva, which is an Asian part of Russia, that are going to be disproportionately serving. And I'm not just spitballing here. There's a lot of data that has come out showing that the Russian government has actually had minority groups from within Russia come out at higher level of casualties when it comes to who's dying, who's getting injured, and who's being sent home in coffins. So I think this is something you could compare to the American invasion of Vietnam, which showed that disproportionately black soldiers were dying at much higher rates than white soldiers. The truth of the matter was that support for the war would drop amongst the voting bases that were most important for a lot of conservatives and war hawks who wanted to keep the war going, was the white middle class. That was the most important group to keep supporting the war, considering how much financial influence they have and the political influence they have. And so once you lost their support, the war was over. And so losing black soldiers was not as politically expedient. Not to mention there was a lot of racism in the military at the time. There's still racism in the military today. That's not to discount that. But there was a lot of racism at the military at the time, more than there is even today. And so I would say that this is something you could compare to that experience with America in Vietnam, where Russia is taking its minority groups, the people with the lowest amount of incomes, and throwing them disproportionately into the fray. This is also affected by the fact that serving in the military for a lot of people in places like Tuva is a bastion from poverty. I mean, this is true in the United States as well, where if you're poor, you don't have a lot of economic opportunities, the old factory job just isn't there anymore, or you don't want to work on the farm your whole life or work as a rancher, then there's not a lot of opportunities in your local community. but a military recruiter will 100% scoop you up and throw you into the war. Not only that, we're seeing the Russian government offer more and more and more money to serve in this war. Now, the $3,000 to $5,000 a month payments that they're offering, plus enlistment fees that the localities are talking about paying, is that really happening? I mean, officially on the paperwork, yes. In reality, I mean, there's a ton of accusations of the Russian government actually not fulfilling these payments. There's even been documented instances of sanitation workers from the Moscow Oblast who have gone into the occupied Luhansk Oblast to do sanitation work, who have recorded video messages to Putin talking about, hey, please pay us, we're not getting paid, because they think Putin can, like, you know, swerve out of the sky and pull them from this terrible situation. Of course, he won't, because Putin isn't a god, but that is an issue they're facing. Now, when it comes to that second point about social media, I do have some disagreement with this, because a lot of Kadyrov's boys, this is people from Chechnya, a lot of soldiers, like you can say shock troops from Chechnya, have been mocked for the fact that they've done a lot more TikToking and posting on social media than they have, you know, actual fighting, which has put their usefulness in combat up in the air. So I don't think it's necessarily true that just because they're sending these people over that they're not going to post on social media. A lot of Russian soldiers and a lot of Chechens have posted on social media, which have even gotten many of them killed because they accidentally end up posting their own position. Now that I've talked about the one thing I agree with Andrew Tate on when it comes to this war, let's talk about everything else, which is absolutely unbelievably wrong.
Ukraine's defending itself, but, and not to sound too crazy, Alex Jones 7 months ago said Russia's going to invade Ukraine in February.
Alex Jones?
Bro, it's all video.
And he's been proven right.
He's been proven right over and over again. He goes, don't worry, there's going to be a big thing in February, World War III, to distract us.
So the clip you just watched was Andrew Tate alleging that Alex Jones predicted the impossible. He predicted what a ton of military analysts, geostrategic, you know, analysts, some of the best, brightest minds in geopolitics were unable to predict. And that was the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And he did it to the month it would happen. And he says why? To distract from the global elite. And Andrew Tate agrees with this, and so does his guest. No pushback on that whatsoever. They actually pump up this idea. And you know, actually, I went and I dug for this clip because, you know, this would be incredible if Alex Jones said this, you know, another Alex Jones was right moment. I really hate to give Alex Jones credit for being right because of how many times he said some such disgusting things about issues surrounding, for example, Sandy Hook. So I dug into it, looked around, and I found the original clip. Alex Jones does not appear to be right here because Alex Jones did not allege that Russia would invade Ukraine in February. In fact, if you play the full clip, which I assume is not the one he saw scrolling around on Facebook, if you play the full unedited clip, Alex Jones actually talks about China starting a war in the month of February, which just didn't happen.
So what you've got to understand here is the smart money is on a war with China. And I don't want a war, but we're looking at a giant war in February right now. Currently, that's the projections with the top people on the earth who claim they're not with the New World Order Combine. Is war in February. This is the type of time, like right before World War I, right before World War II, when everything kicks off. And I hope that doesn't happen. But currently, that is the trajectory we're on. And there is a consensus on that, and a large consensus. I don't mean a consensus with people that just live here in Austin, the new main power hub of the country. I'm talking about all over the world we have contacts. And General Flynn thinks war with China is imminent.
So the thing is, while Alex Jones, you know, predicted a month that a war would happen, he got the country that would be starting the war completely wrong. China has not declared war. China has not invaded any country. You can't give Alex Jones credit for being right when he's saying China is going to invade a country and start a war when the country that did it was Russia. I mean, if I said right now, in the year 2024, Nepal is going to invade India, and then we find out Ethiopia invades Eritrea in 2024, you can't give me credit for that. Just because I said a war would happen at that time when I got the countries wrong. So this is just like a straight up lie from Andrew Tate that Alex Jones alleged that Russia would start this war in February because he didn't. He said China would start a war in February. I don't know if this is a lie purposefully or if this is a just, hey, he was scrolling on social media, stumbled upon this clip, took it at face value and didn't fact check it, which I find much more likely. But he was just straight up wrong here, and he lied. So this next clip, he kind of expands on this idea of this war is to distract us from, the World Economic Forum and all these powerful forces. And so let's play that clip.
It's going to be a big thing in February, World War III, to distract us. Are they trying to distract us from the COVID crimes for the last few years? Is it because the international banking system's fucked? Is it because inflation's out of control? Do they need this war for some reason? Because I am at the point now where I have so little faith in politics. I believe there's somebody above Ukraine and above Putin who's made a call to both of them and said, you're the good guy, you're the bad guy. Go. We need this now. Go. Send some people to get blown up. Some idiots that no one has a Facebook account for. No one's going to know they're gone because we all live on the internet. No one with an Instagram. Send them to fucking go die. And we're going to cause some issues. So we have an excuse for inflation and the banking system failing and the dollar failing and all the COVID lies and everyone getting sick from the vaccine we made them take and everything else. I really am at that point now where I have no faith in any of them. I'm not saying the war isn't happening, but I'm saying the reason they're telling us is fucking bullshit. I agree. Why is Putin just invading Ukraine to the point now, trying to take Kiev? To what end? He ain't gonna be able to take Kiev without massive civilian casualties. No one's gonna accept it. The Russian populace won't accept it. Half of them have fucking cousins in Kiev. Most Russian soldiers from Moscow won't fucking attack a Kiev building. You need some Eskimo. So I'm a conspiracy theorist now. None of it makes sense. I'm sitting in the war room. I'm sitting here in case the Russians come. But I don't believe in any of it anymore.
Alex Jones is right.
So this really upsets me. And this upsets me because this is a take you would only have if you haven't done a lot of research into the war. This is a take that you can give on basically any issue when you don't have a lot of knowledge on it. Like I could say that Biden passed this, student-led forgiveness plan with that executive order to distract us from the criminal justice system. Like you could just say that. You can allege it. But unless you have any evidence of some secret plans that this was cooked up by the World Economic Forum, you could say this about any issue on the planet. I could say that the reason why Joe Biden stopped the Keystone XL pipeline was to distract from Hunter Biden's yada, and then I can go off on these conspiracies with no evidence, no grounding in reality, and just, hey, I'm just theorizing around. I'm just kind of guessing. But the thing that makes it so egregious when it comes to this invasion is that there's years of precedent, not only from what Putin himself has said, but like what the Ukrainian government has said, what the Russian government did in Crimea in 2014, what they did in Donbass in 2014, the last 8 years of fighting in the Donbass, or we could even go into hundreds of years of history when it comes to the Russian suppression of the Ukrainian language and Russian chauvinism and the ideology of people like Alexander Dugin or any of this. But instead, he just goes for this easy explanation that takes no research that you could throw at any issue to sound smart, which is the purpose of it, to sound smart and give the alternative opinion that challenges the establishment. So instead of, say, reading the essay that Putin put out on this issue, highlighting exactly why he is at war and, invading Ukraine, highlighting the speech where Putin did the same thing, repeating many of these points, highlighting his ideological foundation for invading Ukraine. Many of the reasons he invaded Ukraine were not only factually wrong when it comes up to the idea that, Ukraine is an artificial state created by Lenin, but that's his ideological foundation. Factually wrong, it's ideologically wrong, morally wrong, like all of that. But he gives his reasons. He publicly states it. I think a lot of people think, there's the shadowy cabal. A lot of these world leaders are egomaniacs. They'll just openly say what their plans are, and they'll just openly say what they're doing. That happens all the time. Alexander Dugin, somebody who's an influential Russian philosopher in Russia, for example, he said in 1997 in his book, The Foundations of Geopolitics, I just did a video on this, he talks about how, hey, you know what we should do to undermine America and create our new neo-Eurasianist empire? We should foster geopolitical confusion. We should support racist groups. We should support separatist groups. We should, try to undermine stability in America. And where are we right now? In the 21st century, what do we see Russia doing? They're using the Internet Research Agency and a bunch of other organizations to try to foster disorder in the United States. Literally try to pump up misinformation in order to cause chaos so they can undermine America, who is a geopolitical rival to Russian interests. So a lot of these stuff will just be publicly said, and it's like, it's a massive conspiracy. No, a lot of times it'll be publicly said. Conspiracies do exist, but you don't need to allege a conspiracy when there's a much easier explanation that is founded in real geopolitical issues. This is just an attempt from Andrew Tate to, sound smart on an issue he knows nothing about. And that's what's really detestful. That's what really, pisses me off about this is he could have done this on any issues. He could have been saying this about sports. He could have been saying this about any number of issues, but he said it about an issue where hundreds of thousands of people are dying. He could have said it about any other issue on the planet, but he chose the issue that is near and dear to the survival of millions of people. And that's pretty messed up, man. That's pretty messed up. You can clout shark off of any other number of issues to sound smart, but instead you chose a whole country suffering. That's messed up. Now, this idea of screw the history from Andrew Tate so he can give his hot takes on this while talking about how this is distracting you from the other issues and making these big claims that have no substance to them. This isn't the only time he did it. A little bit later, same month, in February, he does this segment where he talks about how Putin is a certified G. And when the idea of history comes up or, talking about the history that led up to this conflict, he just says, Putin says, screw the history. I say, screw the history. I want it. I take it. I take my Ukraine because I'm a certified G. Let's play the clip.
For this week's certified G, we're going to talk about Ukraine.
Because we've been fans of this guy for a long motherfucking time.
Boom.
Boom!
He's just like, I want it. I'll take it.
I can understand a mind like that.
Give me that. Well, it is just, and the historical context and the law. No. I didn't ask you about historical context or law or lines on a map. Give me that.
Now, what's interesting about this is, number one, when it comes to Putin, Putin very much cares about the history. His historical interpretations are wrong. Again, he wrote like a huge essay talking about the war. He did a whole speech talking about the war, talking about the historical context, why he supports this invasion. He often talks about how the collapse of the Soviet Union is the worst disaster of the 20th century. For Putin, history in Russia is extremely important. He is a student of history, even if his interpretation of historical events is very misguided, very wrong, and very crooked. He is a student of history. You cannot deny that from Vladimir Putin. And so trying to say he's like, oh, screw it, I don't care about you, all this is yada, that's wrong. But even if he's just talking about this from a personal level, like Andrew Tate just doesn't care about the history, this just shows almost like just a lack of commitment to looking into this issue, just a lack of care, just a lack of knowledge. This is an excuse for Andrew Tate to not do his due diligence, not to do his research, which would have led to him not making such easy mistakes when it comes to Alex Jones being right on the Russian invasion of Ukraine. But instead of doing that, he needs an excuse to not put any effort in so he can be a hot take machine, right? When you look at these people, look how many, streams they do, how many podcasts they pump out when you talk about these red pill types, how many hot takes they shoot on every issue in the world. I mean, if you ask Andrew Tate about anything, it could be anything at all. You can ask Andrew Tate what's his opinion of soy milk, all the way to what's his opinion on the Korean War, and he'll have an opinion. Does that mean it's a good opinion? Absolutely not. Does that mean it's a well-researched opinion? Absolutely not. The majority of his opinions are not going to be well-researched, as we just saw with the Alex Jones clip. But he needs an excuse as to why he doesn't do any work. He needs an excuse as to why he doesn't look into the nitty-gritty when it comes to issues of huge importance that is leading to thousands of people dying. He needs an excuse. And so he's just like, that's a certified G mentality. I don't need to know the history. I just take my Ukraine. And this is what it leads to. It leads to him just not doing any research, not giving his viewers an in-depth view of the conflict. And there are going to be thousands of people whose only, opinion on this conflict is based off of these Andrew Tate clips. This and this alone, based off of somebody who openly admits that he thinks Putin doesn't care about the history or he doesn't care about the history, and so therefore has done no research. But he does have an opinion on somebody else, and that's Steven Seagal and his view on the conflict, another celebrity who does none of the research.
And another thing about him that makes him a G. You're going to go up to the Kremlin and say, you can't do that because there's this line on a map. And
I don't know. I think he can do it if he wants. And you're like, who's that? And you turn to the left, you turn to the right, you see nobody, and then you come face forward, and it's Jack Cole, Casey Ryback, Steven Seagal himself in your face, front kicking you with his Aikido powers.
And just like every single...
You don't even get to see the president.
You don't even get to see him. Just like every Steven Seagal movie, you're going to bring a bunch of guys with guns, but somehow at the end, no one's going to have a gun, and they're going to be standing there. I'm probably one of the only men who could stand up against him because I have yoga fire.
Yeah.
But the rest of you ain't ready.
Yeah, Steven Seagal is a terrifying man.
So he's a G of the episode because he's just like, everyone knows why he's a G. Like all the Western leaders are like, oh, I love my wife. Lame. He's all like, look, I'm a attack.
Now, what's interesting about this clip is Steven Seagal does actually support Vladimir Putin, and he does support the invasion. But Steven Seagal, if again, Andrew Tate was to wait maybe before giving these hot takes, Steven Seagal actually a few months after these comments were made by Andrew Tate helped the Russian government cover up war crimes in the war, specifically the execution of 53 Ukrainian prisoners of war. I actually did a whole video about this, breaking it down. While Steven Seagal is going on state television and going in front of Russian propaganda television cameras and you know, spouting the Russian propaganda line, 53 people were snuffed from this earth, executed by the Russian government, and he's helping them cover it up. So personally, I would say covering up war crimes isn't certified G behavior, in my opinion. Not to mention, a lot of this is just aesthetics, right? If you listen to how he talks about this war, if you listen to him talk about a lot of the issues he cares about, it's the aesthetics, you know? Putin's on a horse, it's the aesthetics of power, you know what I'm talking about? I mean, this is the same exact thing North Korea does. If you look at these pictures of Kim Jong-un, somebody very much not in shape, somebody who would lose any boxing match they were put in the world, he's fat as all hell. Put him on a horse, put him in front of a snowy mountain, give him a bunch of nukes and propaganda film, and wow, he has the aesthetics of power now. Now he's a cool guy. It's all camera angles and aesthetics. Andrew Tate has come forward in front of the whole world to talk about, hey, look at me. I give the alternative opinion. I do not accept the mainstream media narratives because I'm not a sheep. Anyway, I'm gonna go accept a dictatorship's literal propaganda line because I don't just accept information spoon-fed to me. Anyway, let me go repeat the Russian propaganda line. Let me just say, oh wow, these propaganda film reels and these propaganda photos, they really, you know, they make me think that Putin's a certified G. He is saying, in an attempt to remove these mainstream media propaganda from his mind and to not accept the mainstream nonsense, to not accept the State Department propaganda, whatever you want to call it, in an attempt to not accept that, he just accepts another country's State Department propaganda, another country's military propaganda, and propaganda propping up its dictatorship. In an effort to buck propaganda, he just accepts propaganda at face value that is specifically designed to get people like him to support Vladimir Putin. In an attempt to not be a schmuck for the American government and, you know, the West, he ended up being a schmuck for the Russian government. If we want to play the aesthetics game, I can play this too. Here's a clip of Zelensky mowing down his political opponents in a TV show he was in where he starred the president of Ukraine. Yes, he played a president on TV before becoming the president of Ukraine. So now we're going to fast forward months later to when Andrew Tate's talking about the war after it's been raging on for month after month after month after month. And this is where he really starts to formulate his opinion about the conflict now that it's been going on for a while. So here's a clip where he actually alleges that the entirety of the war is 100% NATO's fault. He lays none of the blame at the feet of the Russian government, the nation that invaded Ukraine, and all of it at the feet of NATO. Let's listen.
I mean, I'll tell you now, you look at Ukraine, the situation in Ukraine was completely, I believe it's completely NATO's fault. They knew what they were doing. They kept prodding Russia. They kept poking the bear. They kept poking the bear. They kept poking the bear. And now that Russia has finally retaliated, which it had no choice but to do within its own self-interest, right? He had to eventually do something.
So what's interesting about this is extremely easy to disprove because he didn't say this is the majority NATO's fault. He didn't say it's like 50-50 or anything that would actually I would have to stand here and like try to intellectually engage in for a longer period of time because it's a more difficult question to answer. Now, again, I think that the blame for this war is like 95% Russia, maybe 5% NATO, right? And I might talk about that in a later video, but let me just talk about how the majority of the blame lays at the Russian Federation, and you can't erase this blame from the Russian Federation. When it comes to the war in Ukraine, the Russian government has pushed it forward at every possible opportunity when they could have de-escalated and instead chose to escalate. They've done this from 2014 all the way to today. In 2014, they illegally invaded Crimea, and not only did they illegally invade Crimea and annex it, they lied about it the whole time, saying, oh, those are just little green soldiers, that's not ours, until years later where they had to admit to it. They then illegally invaded the Donbass, they illegally recruited local Ukrainians, which is a war crime, and fought against the Ukrainian government, the whole time denying it as they had their own soldiers in the country. And then they fought in the Donbass for 8 years against the Ukrainian government, where their proxies, their people, ended up shooting down passenger planes full of civilians and committing war crimes under the watch of Vladimir Putin. And what was the response from the West? Very milquetoast. They send Ukraine some weapons, but basically nothing. They basically gave a big thumbs up and a good luck card over to the government of Poroshenko. And finally, when it came to these training exercises that we heard about months leading up into the invasion, Vladimir Putin called Emmanuel Macron, he called Olaf Scholz, and he talked to them and he told them, I'm not going to invade. I'm not going to invade. He said publicly, this is just a training exercise. This is just a training exercise. This is just a training exercise. And Olaf Scholz tells him in a call, I promise you, for the next 30 years, Ukraine will not join NATO. Not that Ukraine had any option to join NATO, really. I mean, did they fill out the paperwork for the application process? Yes. But as long as Ukraine has a territorial dispute with Russia, as long as Russia has Crimea annexed, and that's a territorial dispute, as long as Russia has invaded the Donbass, and that's another territorial dispute, Ukraine cannot join NATO because countries that have territorial disputes are not allowed to join NATO. And that's on top of a 30-year commitment to Putin behind closed doors for 30 years. 30 years he promised to make sure that NATO would not allow Ukraine to join, while it also doesn't even meet while at the same time it doesn't even meet the criteria to join. And what does Putin do? With the same time he was just saying, don't worry about it, this is just training exercises, he then launches a false flag and invades the country, dressing up his soldiers as Ukrainian soldiers and pretending they invaded Russia. Why would Ukraine invade Russia when all of its armies on its borders? Then he invaded the country and committed many war crimes, atrocities, and everything he could in order to try to conquer that country before failing. And now the war has been going on for 180 days. If you think that this war is the fault of NATO, you just have been ignoring what has been going on in Ukraine for the last 8 years. 8 years, and that's on top of the corruption Russia fostered in Ukraine years before that, the extremist groups that Russia supported years before that, the assassinations that has been alleged on behalf of the Russian government years before that, the Orange Revolution. My God, there's so much we could get into. But the thing is, Tate doesn't know any of this information because he does not care about the history. He does not look into the history because he just wants to be a hot take machine to get attention and make money on the internet. Next, Andrew Tate goes on from saying that this is all the fault of NATO to saying that Russia winning is inevitable. Let's play the clip.
I'm very, very glad NATO hasn't stepped in. Of course, I don't want World War III, but we're just sending loads and loads of weapons to delay the inevitable, just to cause more casualties and more pain for both sides, more headaches for Russia. You think the Americans give a shit? Ukraine could just roll over, give up what Russia wants and just end all of it, right? But because that's what's going to happen in the end. But no, we want to make sure that Russia loses as much money, time and money and men as possible. Who cares if a million Ukrainian civilians die? Let's keep sending Javelin missiles and let's control the media narrative.
Now, the thing that is interesting about this is that people have been saying this for the start of the war, and it's now been over 180 days that this war has been going on. 180 days when the Russians thought they were going to take the country in 3. And there's still people who come up and say, hey, it's inevitable. The Russians are eventually going to win. Copium, copium, copium. The Russians are going to take Kiev any day now, copium. They're going to take Odessa any day now, copium. They're going to take Kharkiv any day now, copium. They're going to take Zaporozhye any day now, copium. They're going to take Kiev any day now, copium. Lviv is going to be Russian territory, copium. And so on and so on. Again, you would think after 180 days of the Russians failing, this starts to sound like America saying we're going to win in Afghanistan after 20 years. Like at a certain point, this sounds kind of like a tune we've heard before. Now, let's talk about why I think they're not going to achieve any of their original war goals. Why I don't think they're going to achieve demilitarization, where, Ukraine's more militarized than ever right now. They're being pumped full of weapons. Why they're not going to achieve regime change. Zelensky's more popular than ever, and Lukashenko is nowhere to be seen. The person that the Russians would want to install. And NATO expansion, another goal that they openly stated that is, one of the reasons why they invaded, to stop NATO expansion, has already been achieved with Sweden and Finland, which has a over 1,000 kilometer border with Russia, is joining NATO. So they've already failed on that front. That's not even something they can reverse, really. Let's talk about some other reasons why I don't think Russia winning is inevitable, and I think Ukraine can win its struggle for democracy. First off, we've seen the Russians fail already. Not only fail to take all of Ukraine, but one of their most disastrous fails was the failed offensive on Kiev, where they tried to take the capital, were stopped, and took massive losses, not only to its regular just conscript troops as they were ambushed on the highways, and we all remember this giant ass convoy that was going to take Kiev that they were talking about. It's over 40 miles long. That stuff was peppered, it was gutted, and it fled back into Russia before being redeployed into Donbass. They failed. They failed miserably to take Kiev. And this shows that the Russians are not invincible. They're not invincible in Ukraine, and the idea that the Ukrainian government is just a rotten edifice that just needs somebody to kick in the door to watch collapse. That's not true. The Ukrainian government is much more stable than many people gave it credit for. And this is why a lot of early predictions about the Ukrainian government collapsing and why the American government offered Zelensky a plane ride out ended up not being accurate. In over 180 days, the Russian government hasn't been able to achieve what would have been a basic goal in the eye of many military analysts early on, and that is achieve air superiority. And over 180 days, the Russian government has not been able to achieve air superiority over Ukraine, which is something basic that would need to be achieved for them to be able to conquer and take all of Ukraine, take the capital, and take large swaths of territory. The fact that they haven't been able to get air superiority over Ukraine is actually, quite frankly, embarrassing. The Russian government has extremely high casualty rates, and then you combine this fact with the very low manpower they have, which has led to them resorting to very unsustainable measures to try to recruit, whether it is the forced conscription of local Ukrainians in the territory they've captured, which is a war crime, by the way, or them offering unsustainable amounts of money that they're going to be paying people monthly to fight in the war, whether it's $3,000 or $5,000 plus local enlistment fees, with a struggling Russian economy to boot, to back up those payments. I don't believe it. And this is on top of the fact that the Ukrainians, for the first time ever, actually have a manpower advantage over the Russian Federation because they don't have the artificial cap that the Russians do, since they're calling this a special military operation and not a full-blown war where they could mobilize. They already have 700,000 people mobilized, and they're moving towards a 1 million strong army. And traditionally, in most warfare scenarios, you need more troops to attack than you need to defend, which puts Ukraine in a favorable position. By the way, let me give you just one example of how, desperate the Russian recruiters are getting. Here is a clip of a Ukrainian in occupied territory being snatched up on his way to pick up his daughter from kindergarten because they're so desperate to get recruits.
Домой пойдешь, не будешь убегать. Что вы мне делаете? Больно! Вы мне больно делаете! Вы мне больно делаете! Вы снимаете? Да. Уберите камеру, пожалуйста.
That's on top of the fact that the troops they are able to, scrape up are extremely low quality. They don't have a high survivability chance, and a lot of times only getting 30 days of training before being sent to the front line. This is on top of the fact that we know of a million different issues that the Russians have had with logistics, they've had with morale, they've even had with troops refusing to fight. Generals keep getting killed on the front line because of bad communication. They have bad planning. Ukraine is amazing at PR and keeping its population encouraged to keep on fighting and getting international support through that PR. This is a generally static front line, which means the idea of the Russians taking large swaths of territory in the near future is hard to believe when their offensives have largely ground to a halt and they haven't even captured all of the Donbass yet. And Ukraine is a terribly large country. I'm telling you, I've driven across Ukraine. I've driven across Ukraine with aid delivery, with reporters, with soldiers, and I'm telling you, it is a large country. If the Russians think they're going to capture all of it with the cauldron tactics they're using right now, they are extremely mistaken. This is on top of the fact that Ukraine has actually taken back a lot of territory. We already talked about Kiev. They retook all the territory around Kiev. They took back the famous Snake Island. They took back territory around Kharkiv. And reportedly, now I don't know if this is going to manifest because all these things are always up in the air. It's a developing story. There's talk of a counteroffensive in Kherson as the Ukrainians are actually working to cut off Russian logistics leading into Kherson to make the defense for it that much more difficult for the Russians. Earlier, I talked about how Ukraine's really good at PR, and they've used that to great effect, and that has made it so that the Ukrainian nation state is more united than it's ever been in its history, with more will to fight till the end, until the Russian soldiers are completely outside of their territory, than we've ever seen before. All the polling numbers seem to indicate this. It's not even close. The support for the war in Ukraine and continuing their struggle against the Russian invasion is higher than the support for the war within Russia, which is not a good thing if you're the invader. And this polling and this PR also extends to the West, which still broadly supports Ukraine. For example, in the United States, the majority of Americans still say we should support Ukraine with arms, aid, and weapons until every single Russian soldier is outside of the country. Only 18% of Americans hold the contrary opinion. One of them, I assume, is Andrew Tate. Not to mention, everybody's seen this footage of the HIMARS, and now I don't want to pretend it's a wonder weapon, but the HIMARS have exploited the terrible system that Russia has for logistics and blew up ammo dump after ammo dump, is blowing up bridge after bridge, making it more difficult for the Russians, who already have strained logistical lines and have not managed their logistics quite well, making it that much worse for them. It's killed countless Russian soldiers, and they're only probably going to get more of those weapons, more long-range missiles, which is going to exploit the fact that Russian air defense is absolutely terrible. I mean, what is Russian air defense even doing? And my goodness, Ukraine has access to the best intelligence in the world provided to them directly by the United States, which has led to them using U.S. intelligence to kill Russian generals. Russian generals. We're not talking about a Russian infantryman. We're talking about the people who are commanding the troops. That intelligence has been vital for them as they fight back against the invasion. This is all on top of the fact that this is an unwanted occupation and partisan activity in places like Kherson is quite high. Belarus, which is a nation that a lot of people thought would also help with the invasion initially, has refused to join the war because they see the writing on the wall. To say Russia is inevitable in its victory at this point is to live in a fantasy land. This is especially true if you're talking about the original Russian war goals, which included regime change, which like reinstalling Lukashenko, which included demilitarization, again, Ukraine is more militarized than ever, and stopping the expansion of NATO, which has already happened with Finland and Sweden.
Who cares if a million Ukrainian civilians die? Let's keep sending Javelin missiles and let's control the media narrative. If you scroll through Twitter, the media narrative they're purporting is that if you make Molotov cocktails, you can take out Russian tanks. You're gonna get annihilated. Like it's literally they're convincing people to commit suicide.
So this point he made about Molotov cocktails, this is like a tiny point, and so I don't want to address it too much, but I am a little peeved about it. So Molotov cocktails can be effective as a resistance tool. They're not extremely effective, but they're not supposed to be like a Wunderweapon. They're supposed to be almost like a symbol of desperation. If anything, I think the best boost it can give is actually, you know, a morale boost. I think there's a YouTube video that talked about this that hopefully I'll link in the description. It talks about the most useful thing that the Molotov cocktail will do is shows that the Ukrainians will go to the ends of the earth to resist the Russian invasion, which is true. I can tell you that from personal experience, but there is some strategic usefulness for it. There was footage that came out of people using this Molotov cocktails against Russian jeeps, logistical trucks, and more lightly armored vehicles, which it can be effective against. But when it comes to tanks, it is true that it can't destroy most tanks. But where it could be useful against tanks is where you're talking about in like urban environments, Molotov cocktails like 5, 6, or 7 dropping at the same time on a Russian tank. This causes the Russian tank to have to close all of its ports, have to close everything it has, which then restricts its visibility, because the thing is about tanks, the big downside of tanks above everything else is it has bad visibility. And in that period of time where it's closing down everything and it's kind of panicking, you know, it's terrifying to have your vehicle that you're sitting in just catch flames, just catch on fire. In that time period, other people in the city can use more effective munitions, whether that be anti-tank mines or you know, javelins or Panzerfaust or what is ever provided by the West. In that period of time, it can buy time for Ukrainian defenders to take it out. So there are ways to use Molotov cocktails effectively. I mean, it's like a 25-cent weapon, so it's not supposed to be a wonder weapon. It would be insane if a 25-cent weapon could necessarily disable a modern Russian tank with ease. But if used effectively, yeah, it can have an effect on the battlefield. It can. So I don't think it's something that can be 100% discredited, and we've seen it used to some effect during the war, at least to take out Russian trucks. I mean, it's not hard to imagine 5 or 6 Molotovs hitting a tank driver panics, drives forward to try to get away because now its vehicle is on fire and it's surrounded, and it just, boom, goes straight into a mine that was placed there by Ukrainian resistance fighters. And this is in urban environments where tanks are already extremely vulnerable because of how many points it can be attacked from, especially from above where the tank has its weakest armor.
And the worst thing about all of this, we made all these sanctions, these unprecedented sanctions against Russia. And now we're suffering mass inflation and fuel crises. And the ruble's at all-time high. Have you seen that?
The Russian ruble is at an all-time high. If I haven't heard that line a million times, I've done a whole video on this about how the Russian economy is collapsing. I showed a Yale study that came out recently showing that the Russian economy is struggling. It's not hard to, consider the fact that, hey, the Russians want the sanctions to be removed, so they probably aren't enjoying it, and it probably isn't hurting the West more than it's hurting Russia. But if we really want to get into the specifics, because again, Andrew Tate does no research in anything he ever talks about, let's get into the specifics. So, over 1,100 companies have fled Russia. They're either in the process of leaving Russia, they've partially fled Russia, or they've completely fled Russia. Those companies account for 40% of the nation's GDP, which is shrinking, by the way. They also employ about 5 million Russians who probably want to keep their jobs. 500,000 Russians have fled the country since the start of the war because they have also seen the writing on the wall. Many of them are highly skilled, highly educated, and are needed for the Russian economy to, do well. And it's already a country that has a depopulation problem as its population is shrinking year after year. 15,000 of those people are highly wealthy individuals who have $30 million plus bank accounts. People who are even wealthier than our friend Andrew Tate here. They have a lot of Bugattis, right? They are the people who help finance the Russian economy. Actually, they make up for 20% of the population that has more than $30 million. 20% of these high capital individuals, these people with a lot of capital that they use to invest in local businesses. That is deadly for economies. Russian imports, which are needed to keep their economy afloat and keep, the airplane industry, the car industry, all these things functioning. The automobile industry, by the way, has seen an 84% reduction in car sales and has gotten so bad when it comes to the parts that they're using for their cars that they're just making cars without airbags right now. Like they're making Soviet era cars just with no airbags. The economy's suffering, man. I mean, industries from all across the Russian economy are suffering due to these sanctions. Manufacturing has seen a 25% reduction in GDP. Professional, scientific, and technical activities has seen a 36% decrease in GDP. Agricultural, forestry, and fishing, 55%. Construction, a 62% reduction in GDP. The consumer price index has seen 20% inflation. We've seen 40 to 60% inflation in industries like technology, the hospitality services, the automobile industry, which we've already talked about, electronical appliances. I mean, the Russian stock index has collapsed. I mean, how long do we have to go on about this? About the Russian economy and the real reality of it? How many times do I have to repeat myself in video after video after video before people realize that you can't just point to the value of the ruble and say, wow, it looks like everything is peachy keen. Look, and let's finish this. I could keep going about the Russian economy for hours. I did a whole video on it where I talk about it for over 40 minutes. If you want to see my more in-depth analysis about the Russian economy collapsing. If you don't believe me, that's 40 minutes that you could just take out to listen to me ramble about the Russian economy. Maybe I can change your mind. But lastly, when it comes to the ruble, it is true that partially the ruble is more stable because the Russian government is making it so that anybody buying their oil and gas has to pay in rubles. But it's also inflated because the government has artificially inflated it. They've restricted people using the ruble and trading it for things like American greenbacks, dollars, or euros. They've specifically gotten involved in the economy and directly stopped people from trading the ruble, which has led to a lot of black market prices that are going on underground being a lot lower. The ruble has a lot less value in those underground black markets, which would probably be a much more honest telling of how much value the ruble holds. Not to mention, the ruble could be worth $1 million, but if I'm not legally allowed under Russian law to go trade a ruble for an American dollar, then that value doesn't matter. The whole reason they're putting these artificial controls in place is so they can have a decent amount of foreign reserve currency, which they're running out of very quickly. Half of their foreign reserve currency was cut out immediately at the start of the war because it was frozen by the United States and other allies. And they've already lost 75 billion of the foreign reserve currency, only leaving them with, I think, 2 years worth of foreign reserve currency if things keep on going as it is. And they need that. They need that to engage in trade. If they run out of it, that's going to spell extreme disaster for the Russian economy. In Andrew Tate's attempt to be a rebel, he just traded out what he thought was one nation's propaganda for another nation's propaganda. That data about the economy that he showed, the ruble, he's specifically cherry-picking information to make the Russian economy look good. The Russian government cherry-picks the ruble to make the Russian economy look good. Instead of asking any questions, and that's how he likes to advertise himself, as a person who asks questions. Instead of asking any questions about the ruble, he just took it at face value, just kept going, didn't examine anything else about the Russian economy. That isn't somebody who asks questions and bucks establishment narratives. He just traded one establishment narrative to another establishment narrative, which is 10 times more incorrect. And for that last comment he made about Ukrainian dyings and the West using them, at the end of the day, it's up to the Ukrainians if they want to struggle and fight for their democracy and fight for their freedom. As an American, I can sympathize with that. I think a lot of Irish people can sympathize with that. A lot of Algerians, a lot of Palestinians, a lot of people around the world who've had to fight independence struggles, I think they can sympathize with that. This will not be the last independence struggle. This wasn't the first independence struggle, and this won't be the last independence struggle. But ultimately, it's not that we're using them as an evil tool against Russia. Ask the Ukrainians. Just ask them. They want to continue to struggle against the Russian government until they're out of their territory. They're fighting an independent struggle. And they're allowed to put their lives on the line if they want to for freedom. They have that right. And I don't think it's up for Andrew Tate to say they don't and they should just all roll over and give the Russians whatever they want. I mean, just think about what that would mean. That could mean the loss of the Donbass, the permanent loss of Crimea, the permanent loss of so much territory, Mariupol, Kherson, so much territory. And we know what the Russians did in Crimea when they executed Tatar activists after annexing it. That's going to happen all across the south. We saw what happened in Bucha. Who knows what number of untold atrocities are going on in Russian-occupied territory right now. That's why Ukrainians are fighting. That's why they're struggling. Because they just want their fucking country back. And God forbid that they have the right to fight for it. Andrew Tate, if you want to flex, okay, and, pretend to know more than you want, stick to your relationship advice and stay out of geopolitics. Honestly, probably stay out of the relationship advice as well. I don't even need to say that. You're getting banned off so many platforms, it doesn't really matter. Hey, you know what? Tate, you didn't get banned. You weren't banned off of any of these platforms. It was just a special deplatforming operation. You guys have a good one. I have a Patreon that I would really appreciate if you went and supported. I'm really trying to, raise money so I can continue to do reporting out here in Ukraine, and so I can worry a little bit less about finances and worry more about putting out videos like this on the channel. Love you guys. Have a good weekend. So let's start about the talk. So let's start with the tart of the war. What does that even mean? The tart of the war. So let's start.